Welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we are discussing everything about Persuasion by Jane Austen.
Otherwise known as Loving Anne Elliot hours.
Also known as, I don't want anyone else in this book to be allowed within a square mile of Anne Elliot.
I mean, I feel my terrible summary would be, I wanted to fight the dad and I was only 3 chapters in.
Yeah, that's a mood. That's a mood.
Just.
It's like, pining for 8 years. It does work sometimes, kids.
I didn't even like the love interest that much for a lot of the book, to be perfectly honest.
It's not really about him, let's be honest.
No, he's a prop.
He is incidental to the plot.
So the Spark Notes plot of this book is that Anne Elliot is the protagonist, and when she was 19, so 7 years ago at the time that this book is set, she was 19 7 years ago, and she was engaged to this young naval officer, Frederick Wentworth, who didn't have any money, and so her family persuaded her to call it off, and she has regretted it ever since. 7 years later, he's made loads of money fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, and comes back into her life and is like, look at me, I'm rich, and I resent you for having broken off our engagement all these years ago, and I'm going to flirt with lots of women in front of you. And it's really sad because she's still in love with him. And obviously they end up together because this is Austen. But it's basically a story of how this poor protagonist just has a really bad time for, like, the entire book.
Yeah, pretty much.
It felt like, to me, a Regency rom-com. Like, in a rom-com, you have the 2 love interests, and then in the centre of the film, they drift apart. Maybe one of them gets another partner, maybe they just realise they're not made for each other, and by the end of the film, they come back together and realise their true love. And I feel like it is that in book form in Regency England.
I don't consume enough rom-coms to be able to draw that to be able to draw that similarity. The most rom-com stuff that I read or watch is Austen, to be honest.
I don't think there's quite enough drama for it to be a modern rom-com. I think any of the other Austens, you've got, like, there's a lot more going on plot-wise, and I quite liked how, like, sort of low-key this one was, actually. That it is the original mutual pining situation.
It was her last novel, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yes,
it
yes,
was published after her death, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
1818, according to my note.
I don't know whether that kind of just colours our readings of it, because I think I knew that when I first picked it up, but, like, it does feel like it's quieter, it's more mature, everybody's less chaotic. The fact that it seems to be perpetual autumn and mildly melancholy, I think really kind of infuses it.
The plot relies less on misunderstandings, I think.
Yes.
And nobody ever thinks that somebody's, I don't know, has a completely wrong impression of somebody else's character, for example, like you have in Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
It really is about people realising what they want, more so than it is realising what's true.
Yeah. It's very, I think we deserve a soft epilogue, my love. We are good people and we've suffered enough kind of vibes.
Yeah. I definitely feel that it was quite interesting. I've never read... I mean, there again, I can't say I've read much classic literature, but anyway, point stands. That the fact that, Jane Austen is really going in for the dad and how much of a bad dad he is. And I'm just thinking, how much of a reflection on either she's met somebody or I just think she's sort of met this person and going, you are a dick. And I'm going to put this in a book. Like...
I mean, literally all my notes are just, like, all caps. I'm going to kill you, Walter! Like, I've got that multiple times. Oh my God.
When we get to the who do you want to fight portion of the podcast, we are just going to... I mean, that's going to be most of this podcast, right?
Like, this is too early. I will come back to this later. But this is an unusual Austen novel, and I think there isn't one obvious person that you should fight. But we'll get back to that. We will get back to that. Its time will come.
I did like how the father is called a conceited, silly father. And I was like, that's such a good comment of just... This guy has clearly got the favourite child is the eldest, Elizabeth, and she can do absolutely no wrong, even though you know, she is still not married. All they care about is their statue and their position in society, which obviously is clearly something very important at the time. You know, you're wanting to move yourself up in society, but I just felt like Anne understands why she had to reject him the first time round. Lady Russell gave her this advice that you probably shouldn't marry him. He doesn't have very good connections or money, and you as a woman, that's not going to help your position in the future.
And there's a repeated emphasis on that everything that he has is based on luck as well. Like, that comes back over and over, that he's lucky, which isn't something you can necessarily base a long-term relationship on.
And at the time, you know, when she was 2021 at the time that they first got engaged.
I think 19, so even
was it
younger.
19?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Lady Russell's really looking out for her, which I thought was Lady Russell's such a nice character, and I kind of like at the end how she understands that she shouldn't have called it off, but at the same time, if she hadn't allowed them to call it off, then he couldn't have gone off and made his money.
It's true, and it's an interesting take, because I think the narrative doesn't portray her as having been wrong to give that advice 7 years ago, but that it didn't turn out well anyway. Because Anne is never able to move on, she never finds love with anyone else, she turns down proposals.
I mean, to be fair, would you want to be married to Charles Musgrove?
Well, in the book, so I watched the 2007 film adaptation with Sally Hawkins and Rupert Penry-Jones, and it was lush because it's just, you know, period drama with lots of pretty people in it. And in the movie, in that film, Charles Musgrove is portrayed as this sort of really unlikable, really just oblivious, kind of foolish man. Is that also true, do you think, as much in the book, or do you think that's a different character decision that they made for the movie?
I think Charles Musgrove does not appear very much in the book. Like, he's not, it's not like the Elliots, where you get the full first chapter is like these really detailed character portraits of Walter Elliot, Elizabeth Elliot, and Lady Russell. You don't get that for him. Instead, I think, and he's sort of effaced by how much his wife complains.
Yeah.
I think the only things I really know about him is that he spends a lot of time out of the house. He disagrees with his wife on most things. And he's generally not very helpful. Like, it's never really, like, pushed as, like, he is less helpful than is standard for a Regency husband. But there is a lot of him being out hunting. There's a lot of him being out paying calls at other places. You kind of get the impression that he's avoiding his wife.
Well, he wanted to marry Anne, and he settled for Mary.
Yeah, that's something that really struck me, actually, on this reading, because I think I've only read it once before, how sorry for Mary I felt, because, so this is Anne's, I think is she an older sister, or is she the
She's the younger sister?
I think she's younger.
Okay, so yeah, she's the younger sister. Her husband asked to marry her other sister first, and then turned to her when Anne turned him down. Like, that's not exactly it's not a good setup for a relationship, I wouldn't think. We're not really given any sense of how fast that turnaround was either. Like, is this a Mr. Collins situation where, like, Lizzie rejects him and then, like, at dinner the next day, he's like, hey, Charlotte Lucas, time to get married. Like, or is it, you know, is there a longer process of, like, him getting to know Mary and being like, yes, actually, I have genuine feelings for you.
It is common knowledge, though, that he proposed to Anne, who turned him down.
Yeah.
And, like, that's got to affect their relationship and how their relationship is presented to other people, which is obviously so much of sort of Austen novels, is how are you perceived? What does society think of you?
I think that's so important with Mary, especially. Like, I hadn't read this book before, and I just got the impression from her that she wanted to move up in society, but also move out of the house. You know, the dad kept a book of, like, when they were born and wrote in when they got married. And if you're brought up, you're brought up in this environment where, you know, she must have been even younger when her mother died. And the only way to sort of escape this, I guess, narcissism is probably the only way to describe it. This narcissistic father who is just so devoted to the eldest daughter is to get married. And so she's like, this is my way out. This is my way to get up in society. But what I did like was in the book, the comparison between the different types of relationships, because I think that is still a very important point to today, is, you know, in a relationship, one of the most important things is communication. And the Admiral and Mrs. Croft, who move into the hall, they have no kids, they're happily married, they have healthy conversations with each other, in comparison to Mary and Charles, who just sort of passive aggressively say things to each other, and that's just not healthy.
And Anne to take sides.
Yeah, and just saying, well, no, you're going to pick my side because I'm more important. Like, no, it's your problem. Go and deal with it. Stop dragging other people into the situation.
Yeah.
Go and have your domestic in private.
Yeah, just go and just deal with your issues. But it was quite a nice... It's a really nice thing to read in a novel written over 200 years ago. That this is still a thing, that people still don't learn how to communicate. You know, it's not going away. People just need to learn. Go read a book and go learn how to communicate and actively listen. End of rant.
Yeah. And that's something that struck me also about the relationship between Anne and Frederick, is that they give each other space. And part of the reason that it takes them a while to get together is they're both kind of afraid of treading on each other's toes, or at least that's how I perceived it, sort of. Yeah. They don't want to make each other uncomfortable or overstep. And I think that's quite a nice... So obviously in sort of modern rom-coms, that tension and that drawing out of, you know, the resolution would be done by miscommunications and drama and angst. Whereas in this, I mean, obviously it's sort of, you know, they're very much pining for each other. But part of it is they could actually have resolved it a lot earlier if they just actually talked to each other. But they don't, because they're afraid of doing so, which I think is very relatable and very, like, real. Yeah.
And they're very kind of... They're trying to be really gentle with each other now. Once Wentworth's kind of got over his, look how much I'm flaunting all these attractive women that are flocking to me thing, which I think you can make arguments for him, like, getting out of that at very different places in the novel, depending on how you read it. But
the movie portrays it as very late, the movie I watched, which is one of the reasons why I really didn't like him in that movie, because it felt very callous to me.
Yeah. And, like, to be fair, it is a thing that he kind of almost reaps the consequences of in the book, because it's something that, you know, people assume that there's an understanding, which means honourably he can't get out of marrying Louisa Musgrove if she decides to press it. But, yeah, I think... reading the book, I was also thinking, oh, it'll take a while for him to kind of come round. I am not convinced, actually, on a second read, that it took him any time at all, because there are, much earlier than I remembered previously, there are the kinds of conversations you get in Mutual Pining Fics, where one of the characters says something, and it's relayed to the other character, and the other character's going, oh gosh, that means he could never love me again. And you as the reader are going, no, that's not what he meant.
Loves you love each other.
It felt like like a primary school crush, when you're like, oh, I like him, and then your friend goes and says, oh, by the way, this person, like, it just felt like a sort of they cannot talk to each other in a room, because that would be probably, you know, not allowed by themselves.
Or, I mean, so the confession that Frederick gives to Anne, as he goes, oh, you know, you pierced my soul, I'm half agony and half hope, right? Which is one of the most, like, famous confessions in all sort of romantic literature. And I think that kind of sums it up, is that the hope hurts. He can't, it would be dangerous for him to, like, emotionally, to go and say, actually, I still really like you, do you think we could still be a thing? Because it's so important.
Yeah.
So you'd rather,
if I loved you less,
hide
I might
away.
be able to talk about it more. Yeah.
And he kind of, I feel like with Louisa, so Louisa is the youngest is she the youngest or second youngest?
Yes.
Youngest, yeah, of the Musgroves. And she is, SparkNote says, she falls easily in love, quote unquote. So I think she's kind of romanticised the Navy, and therefore this guy's turned up who is rich and in the Navy, and she's romanticised it in her head. And I feel Frederick just goes along with it because he doesn't know how to get out of that situation. And he can't really say no due to reasons of propriety and honour. He can't say, actually, I don't want to talk to you. Please leave me alone. I like this other person over there.
I've got to say, one of the things I liked about Persuasion compared to maybe, I might be remembering this wrong, but other Austen novels, I enjoyed how many characters were just friends with each other.
Yes.
And the impression I kind of got of his relationship with Louisa was that it was very flattering that she was so interested, but also that he just genuinely liked talking to her. Like, I think he did care about her as a person. Like, I think by the time they've reached the seaside, I think he's not really expecting to marry either of the Musgroves. He's not that interested. Like, I
think he's realised that he wouldn't be happy.
Yeah, he said flippantly to his sister before he arrived that he was perfectly willing to fall in love with anybody. And I think that kind of... I don't think that attitude really changes, and that I don't think he's never actually love-struck by any of them. But that doesn't mean he doesn't like them. It doesn't mean he doesn't enjoy their company. That we never really hear a word said against the Musgroves in terms of them being perfectly pleasant company. And I think, I kind of enjoyed just how many characters, like we meet all of Wentworth's friends, you know, we get to know all the Musgroves in this sort of wide social group, and, you know, there's these, like, the friendships that Anne forms with, what's the sad man? Benwick.
There's the sad man whose fiancé died, yeah.
Yes, based on, like, you know, their shared reading list, and on Anne kind of being like, well, maybe if I recommend you the right books and we have some, like, compassionate conversation, you'll be a bit happier and a bit less mopey and whatever.
Do some mindfulness and maybe you won't be so miserable.
I enjoyed the fact that we saw all these different friendships, and actually, like, one of the things throughout the book is Anne coming into her own with these friendships and having people that are there for her and not for her family.
Yeah.
Like, by the end of the book, when she's in Bath, she's spending basically no time with her family, and she's with the Crofts, and she's with the Musgroves, and she's with her friend Mrs. Smith. Over the course of this fairly melancholy novel about lost love, she comes to find all these people who do genuinely respect her, and I really like that.
And it's not centred on Wentworth. You know, even if she didn't get back together with him, she would still have those relationships and they would still be meaningful and healthy for her.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she's still in a materially better position in terms of, like, her friendships and her relationships at the end of the novel than she is at the start. Which, can I talk about the beginning of the book for a second? Because I love the fact that Anne isn't really introduced to us properly until, like, the third chapter. Like, have you ever seen a better narrative construction of everybody in this character's life forgets about her than her just not being mentioned at all for chapters at a time?
It sets up the difference between the sisters so well. And I just felt reading the first few chapters going, the dad is an arse. Like, I get he is trying in his own probably little warped way to remain single so that his daughters can marry well, they're not influenced by a stepmother or like to stepmother's position, etc. But it's just,
he's played in the film that I watched by Anthony Head, who does such a phenomenal line in I'm posh and I don't care about anyone else's feelings, which I think I also, you know, reminds me of him playing Uther in Merlin, which is what I think is the archetypical Anthony Head role. He is so hateable, and it is just delicious to watch because he really just sort of embodies that this ideal that he has of himself, and you know, you can very clearly see who he thinks he is. But obviously then as the reader and the viewer, you are seeing who he actually is, and the massive, massive gulf between those two people.
Yeah. I love watching everybody else reacting, all the people that we know to be vaguely sensible, reacting to his shenanigans. Like, there's a moment when they're talking about renting out Kellynch Hall, and the lawyer just nopes out. Like, they ask him for an opinion, and he's like, nope, gotta go right now, immediately. Like, I can't, I'm not touching that, I'm leaving.
I think shenanigans is too kind a word. I think buffoonery.
But, like, there's a conversation that the Crofts have with Anne where, like, the Admiral's like, I had to take all the mirrors out of the room. What man needs that many mirrors? That was horrifying. And it's just so many, like, just little jabs at him from characters that we are brought to respect more by the narrative. It's just, very
And I quite
enjoyable.
like that they make that comment to Anne as well, because it's a subtle little, we know what you're dealing with. Like, we understand that you don't deserve this.
Yeah, we're on your side,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Crofts are excluded from the nobody should be allowed within a square mile of Anne rule.
Yep.
That the Crofts and Mrs. Smith, her childhood friend from her school days.
See, I'm kind of ambivalent towards Mrs. Smith. like, okay, I think she comes round in the end. I appreciate the whole, she's an old school friend. She was there for Anne when her mum died. This is, an important relationship to her. I couldn't quite get over the fact that she was going to let her marry Mr. Elliot.
For money.
Like, yeah. I think even if you thought the engagement was like there was no way to get out of it, surely you'd warn her. And like, or you wouldn't be so enthusiastic about him, because the shift from when she thinks Anne is engaged to him and she's singing his praises and he's such an amazing guy, all of this. And then as soon as Anne's like, I'm not going to marry him, right? She's like,
she goes,
oh, thank God, he's the worst piece of trash that ever walked the earth. And it's like, and none of her reasons for not telling her really rang, it's not that they didn't ring true so much as I was like, that's not a good excuse.
That's not good enough. Interestingly, the movie that I watched, they don't have that at all.
Okay.
Her response when she thinks that Anne is going to marry Mr. Elliot is to run up to her on the street and be like, you must know about his character, he's the worst piece of garbage ever to walk the earth. So you don't have that turnabout that she does.
Interesting.
And so I read an analysis that was sort of like, her reasons for wanting to support the union potentially between Anne and Mr. Elliot is that she might be able to do well out of it, as in she, Mrs. Smith, because she is disabled and lives on her own and can only afford a nurse who also looks after other people as well. So she's really living in the most severe poverty that I think Austen ever really writes about.
I mean, I think in Emma you meet a few people who are in similar or worse circumstances because it's a plot. Well, it's been a few years since I read Emma. Crisis for Emma that she is unconscionably rude to one of those people and who is like, a little bit annoying, but also incredibly kind and incredibly dependent on the goodwill of the village. Like for Emma in her position to be that rude to her in a public place in front of her is just beyond the pale. So I think there are, and I mean the main characters in Sense and Sensibility are also not very well off, but I don't know, like they've got a full house to live in and they have some money and they're able-bodied and they don't have to work necessarily. So like
and they have each other. Like Mrs. Smith, like she's completely isolated, right?
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, I thought Mrs. Smith was a nice addition because you never see also female friendships. Like it's very rare you're passing the Bechdel test in book form, especially with romance novels. It's very much like the crux of it is the relationship between the two characters in the romance. But what I liked about this is it just felt like a side quest. It's a side option. It's Anne Elliot going through dealing with her life, and at the end she happens to fall in love and the guy also likes her back, who she liked in the first place. But I did have a bone to pick with Captain Frederick Wentworth. It's just the fact that in the start of the book, when he'd spoken about how he felt about Anne giving him up, he said she had used him ill, deserted and disappointed him. And worse, she had shown a feebleness of character in doing so. And I just felt, it's a bit rich coming from him because he is a man. Like, she has way more to lose in a bad marriage than he does. He can own property, he can have money, she can't. And so it was an interesting comment because it again brings up the fact that she's writing this in a time where women couldn't own property. Yet, it's a very, like, romantic idea of, like, he'd, like, thought that she deserted him and he was annoyed and upset when it's actually probably, I just have this feeling women reading this at the time probably go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
We all have to think very long and hard about marriage because just like Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice, the only way to get up in society and move out of the house and leave your parents is to get married. So that's a very important life decision.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, the Doylist take, I guess, on that line from Wentworth. And I think that's totally true, is that it's limited in sort of his perspective because he probably isn't appreciative of the fact that, Anne has way more to lose.
Yeah.
My read on it on a sort of Watsonian take is I don't think he ever got over Anne at all because he basically went straight into being in the Navy and not being around women basically at all ever. And so when he returns and they're all at Uppercross and he's staying at Kellynch Hall with the Crofts, and this is like the first time that he's basically interacted with eligible women since his engagement with Anne was broken off. And so all of this flirting with the Musgroves, and he's not some sort of suave, you know, experienced ladies man or anything. He's basically the same dude he was, just now he's got money, so people want him.
Yeah.
So it's sort of that line from him I read as he's still really hurt, and he still doesn't quite understand why he wasn't good enough. Even if he might like logically understand that there were reasons to break it off, he doesn't agree with them.
Yeah. I mean, I quite actually like that we see him sort of develop. He does grow as a person between that line and when he comes back into Anne's life. Like, I think it felt like a very realistic detail to me that he wasn't gracious in defeat. He was pissy about it, and he wasn't understanding, and because his feelings were hurt, it felt very, I don't know, it just felt very real to me that in that situation, even the best guy potentially is going to be like, actually, I'm defensive and upset about this and I'm going to lash out, rather than being like, let's consider this from Anne's perspective.
I tell you what, the conversation, like really close to the end of the book, with Anne and Captain Harville, he's talking about Benwick and how he's like moved on very quickly, and you know, women have, what was it? It was have rushed feelings and just move on. And they're talking at the end. He's saying, I don't think I've ever opened a book in my life that has not said something to say upon women's inconsistency. Songs and proverbs all talk of women's fickleness. And she just comes back and says, yes, if you please, no reference to examples of books. Men have had every advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs in so much higher a degree. The pen has been in their hands. I will not allow books to prove anything. And I'm just like, yes, I love
it.
Also the fact that when she's writing this, like, it's such a forward-thinking just idea. And it's just it just made me so happy, because Anne is just going, you know what, sod you, and you can take...
Hashtag own voices.
Yeah, take your ideas and shove them in a bin, because quite frankly, you know, women need to tell their own stories. You can't say, oh, there's no stories, if they've been written predominantly by the cis men all the time. It's just not right. And
I think it's a great sort of indication of like how far she's come as well. Like,
she stands up for herself.
Yeah, exactly. And she's I mean, I think, to be fair to her, we don't actually I feel like one of the things that I really appreciated about her from fairly early on, and I love that this is basically the first thing we know about her. We get these really long detailed character portraits of her father and her sister and Lady Russell, and then by the time we finally hear something about Anne, something that's more detailed than just Lady Russell being like, oh, anyone with sense would see that Anne is like smart and a good person, is her standing completely firm on the subject of Sir Walter Elliot should pay his debts. It's something like every decision of Anne's was on the side of equity and justice, and she's being stricter than Lady Russell, than her father could ever dream of being. And she's just like, no, it's the right thing to do. We absolutely cannot just walk off the estate and owe people money. That's not, we have responsibilities. And I love that that's the first thing we see of her. Even before we have any indication that she might have made a decision in her youth that other people characterized as being, I don't know, weak-willed or wishy-washy. The very first thing we hear about her is going, actually, I have a very strong and fierce opinion on this, and I'm not going to compromise on it. And I love that contrast, because the defining decision of her life, the inciting incident of the novel, is that she yielded to persuasion. And yet the very first thing we hear her say is actually, no compromise. This is a question of justice. We will do this way or not at all.
Nice.
I love that.
Thinking about her, you know, yielding to persuasion, like, so when she turned down Charles Musgrove, which is, again, before the start of the novel, the Musgroves really liked the idea of that match, and they thought that Lady Russell had, again, convinced Anne not to, you know, to turn down, and Lady Russell was really in favour of the match, and so it's interesting that the Musgroves then went, oh, well, she must have been persuaded against it, when actually it was Anne's own decision, and the person that they think did the persuading was also in favour.
It's almost like they psychically knew that she'd turned down a proposal based on Persuasion, but they didn't know anything about Wentworth, so they just pushed it onto the one engagement that they knew about.
Yeah, which she turned down because she didn't love him.
Yeah.
Which is quite, that's strong-willed for, again, like, he has money. She could have had a comfortable life with him, as her sister then goes on to do, even if they're pretty miserable.
And this was one of the things that really struck me as being one of those traditional mutual pining trope conversations where she thinks he's interpreted what she said one way and he's actually interpreted another way, or at least that's how I read it, because I liked the fact that the conversation is, oh, she turned down so-and-so, and you, as a reader, you're going, because she didn't love him, she made a choice. It didn't matter that it was a good and sensible marriage. Mm-hmm. And then, whichever Musgrove is talking about it, says, oh, we figured Lady Russell must have persuaded her. Mm-hmm. And Anne, hearing that Wentworth has heard this, automatically assumes that Wentworth is going to focus on the Lady Russell persuaded her and not on the she said no to a very advantageous marriage. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And I think that is one of the moments where they are taking different things out of the conversation, because Anne assumes he believes that Lady Russell persuaded her, because why wouldn't he? And Wentworth goes, oh, maybe she makes these decisions based on her own will and, reason, you know? Maybe she looked at this marriage and went,
no thanks.
I don't want this, even though it's practical, even though it's sensible, even though everybody in my life wants it. I'm not going to do it. Mm. And he goes, maybe that's the way she's been making decisions all along.
Yep. One thing I love about that scene as well is that it's such a classic, tropey. Anne has taken a rest beneath a tree and she is concealed by the greenery.
Yes.
And past her walks her love interest and the romantic foil that he's currently chatting up. Mm. And they have a conversation about her perfectly within her earshot, and the crossed wires and the angst. It's just such a cliche setup, and yet it works wonderfully. It never feels sort of forced.
Yeah, that is a conversation I wanted to talk about, because I loved the development of Louisa through that we only see it through Anne's eyes. We're never really in Louisa's head. But I love how you can see, just from Anne eavesdropping on that conversation, the moment when Louisa decides to be stubborn as because Wentworth has been like, I admire people who stick to their guns no matter what. And Louisa's like, okay, that better be me. And that directly leads to her falling off the cob. That is the direct consequence. Wentworth is like, oh no, don't do it. Come on, we've had enough fun. And she's like, no, catch me again. And bangs her head and then is indisposed for 6 months or however long it takes, and they think she's going to die. I think there's a moment, and I can't remember if it's before or after the fall, because one of those is very, very petty, but there's a literal moment of Anne thinking, maybe after this event, or maybe after such and such an event has happened, maybe Wentworth will consider that being stubborn, like most character traits, is better in moderation. It really struck me this time just how petty this book is in places.
Yeah.
Austen will drag anyone. She'll drag Wentworth, she'll drag Anne,
Dick Musgrove.
Enjoyably petty.
I feel Dick Musgrove.
Yeah. It never feels unkind necessarily. Or, well, I don't know actually. There's a bit at the beginning where they're talking about why they fell in love. And she goes, he had nothing to do and she had almost nobody to love. And it's really sad, but it's also really cynical. And she goes on to say, half as much genuine affection would have been enough.
Yeah.
But as it was, they were genuinely really into each other, so it was fine. But the fact that she led with, he had nothing to do and she had almost nobody to love, was just...
I mean, that is something that, coming away from this story, I just felt sad in a way. They end up together happy. Louisa ends up married to someone else. It's an Austen novel, so the ends get tied up neatly, and the villain ends up, out of everyone's lives.
No one gets sacrificed to a cad. There's no Lydia Wickham situation.
But I did just feel sad because these people just went through so much grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very melancholy novel.
Sort of unnecessarily. I mean, they went through character development as well, but it's sort of... I don't know,
It could have been completely avoided.
Yeah, no, I think the fact that it's mostly set in autumn really got me, actually, because I feel like it was a seasonal melancholy. You really felt that kind of, I'm going into the I am come to autumn where all the leaves are gold kind of thing. But that sense of like, they're not coming to the end of their life, but there is that sense of like,
the end of their
the
youth,
first
certainly.
bloom is over, right? The summer is over. Their first enthusiastic, innocent, passionate love is over, and now they're adults and they have to do this the adult way, where they're quiet and gentle and patient. And I think that I really liked that. I felt there was a real sense of peace in it, and also inevitability. Like, you never feel like Anne is very at peace with her decision. She's very like, actually, you know what? I can't regret that decision. I made it with the best of intentions and the best of reasoning. But I wouldn't advise anyone else that way. She's very, like, it's very nuanced in how it's respecting her agency, but also acknowledging that she's learnt from it.
See, she's done some mindfulness.
I just love...
It feels like if they hadn't made the decisions that they'd made, this story wouldn't have happened the way it happened.
Yeah.
You know? There's this kind of sense of inevitability to them getting together, and that almost dares you to think, oh, maybe they should have done it different. You know, it's like, really? You think they should have done it different? Then would they be here? Like, I don't know, it just feels very...
When he gave her the letter, it made me feel so happy. And I am not the world's biggest fan of a rom-com. I will admit that now. But it was just one of those moments where it just made me feel with such happiness and such joy, because it's just... You've spent the whole book, and I love how the fact that she is 27, I'll just put that out there now, that she's not 16, it's not a young adult novel, she's not 22 like in Pride and Prejudice, she's 27, she's nearly 30. In most other novels, and to be honest, in quite a lot of societies today, like, I feel you have this underlying expectation, it's like, right, you go to school, you go to university, you find someone, you get married, done. Before you're 30. And it was just quite refreshing to have somebody who was over the age of 25 falling in love. I would just say that now.
For reference, there is nobody on this podcast that's not
the age of 25. Like, we are old. We are millennials.
On the other hand, I did do the go to university, meet someone, get engaged bit.
That's just you.
But it's... You know, but that's one out of three, you know? That's to say that should be the norm.
Yeah.
And to have something from, 200 years ago when these norms were even more rigidly enforced, saying, actually, that doesn't matter, you can still be at peace with yourself and get the guy.
That reminds me of a moment that I really enjoyed. It's another fairly petty one. It is the first moment where Mr. Elliot the younger, Mr. Elliot the cad, who's technically the heir to Kellynch Hall, I think.
Another person I want to punch, by the way.
Oh, yeah. But, like, the first time he sees Anne, and we don't know who he is at this point. Mr. Elliot has been introduced to us earlier in the novel as the ungrateful heir who refuses to have anything to do with the main family, and who has potentially said some very rude things about them in the public eye.
To be fair, Walter Elliot deserves it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But yeah, he runs into Anne at Lyme Regis. I think they're just, like, they pass each other on the street.
And they're, like, checking each other out.
And there's this really, like, slow motion sense of him looking at her and going, damn. and like, Frederick Wentworth noticing this and going, wait a second. Other people think Anne's hot?
No, that's my thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's that realization of, like, seeing other people value somebody that you love, and then being like, oh, I have very strong feelings, actually. I really enjoyed that as a moment. Like, even if we'd never met that guy again, I would have enjoyed that. I thought that was great.
It's because you see, it comes up in fanfiction, it comes up in rom-coms all the time, where jealousy is a motivator, and often that's really unhealthy. But I think in this instance, it works really well because it doesn't get externalized at all. No. It just serves as a catalyst for him to go, oh, actually, no, I do still care.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's not jealousy as an overweening character trait in as much as it's a flash in the pan. It's his immediate response is jealousy. Yeah. And then that triggers a revelation. Rather than it being an ongoing part of his character, it's a thing that tells him to, sit up, pay attention. Something serious is going on.
I think it felt like it's hang on a minute, I still have feelings. I thought they'd gone, but clearly they haven't. Maybe I'll act on them. Yeah. It was...
Yeah, just... Rather than, this guy wants her, he can't be allowed to have her, I must.
Yeah.
Which was, again, adorable. And I just loved when she gets the letter of his, love letter, and he's writing it, and he thinks he's writing it to somebody else, and then it just says, hardly legible to Miss A.E., And she was like, oh my God, must read it. And then she just says, such a letter was not soon to be recovered from. And it's just,
Yeah.
it was so adorable.
I've got to say, I love how emotional Anne is, right? I love how, like, so many times she's on the verge of tears in public places. She's so anxious that she doesn't remember anything that gets said in the room. You know, there's so many moments where it's really interesting, because I know I said it was a very peaceful book, but it's also punctuated by these moments of Anne not being this calm, steady presence that everybody trusts her to be, but being like this close to absolutely losing it. And it's always conveyed just so sharply.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
I mean, so the bit where she goes, oh, you know, this letter was not easily to be recovered from, has such a ring of truth to it for me, because I remember when I got together with my now fiancé, and we were messaging each other, and it came out that we both wanted to go on a date with each other, and I hid under my duvet for like 5 minutes and couldn't look at my phone. Like, it's a very real thing.
And it's so true when you're just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what do I do? I need to go and talk to somebody. And she can't talk to anyone. And it's just that moment that now you probably get on Messenger or text message your friend and just all caps going, oh my God, have I got something to tell you? And it was like that 200 years ago. It's so, makes my heart happy. Makes my little bookworm heart happy.
Do you know what else would make my heart happy, though?
What?
Punching like 75% of the people in this book.
Okay, who would you have a fight with? Let's go.
How can we possibly decide? There are so many punchable faces in this book.
I think Elizabeth is underratedly awful. The older sister.
That moment, there's a moment early on where she's like, oh yeah, you can take Anne, it's fine. Nobody will want her in Bath. And I was ready to throw down. I was ready to like transcend this mortal plane straight into the pages of this book and just throttle her. Because nobody will want her in Bath.
I want to reach back into 1818 and be like, I want her!
Nobody wants you in Bath, Elizabeth. They all want Anne.
Yeah.
I feel the dad. I just think the dad is just such...
He so deserves it.
He deserves it.
He's just so odious.
And it's the fact that he has in this book, and it's so cruel that he has this book and he's written in when Mary got married, and he like looks at Elizabeth, but for Anne he's like, I don't really give a shit about her. Like it's just so cruel. And then he says that she's really boring, and later on in the book all they care about is just meeting people for social status and this sort of vanity again with the mirrors. He's so vain.
Also thinking about how Anne is his least favourite daughter, I think isn't she the one who's supposed to be most like their mum?
Yeah.
What does that say about his relationship with their mum?
Therapist
It's heavily implied that was not happy. That Anne's mother went into it with the intention of reforming Sir Walter Elliot to some extent.
Oh dear.
And unsurprisingly, did not benefit from that arrangement in any way.
No, indeed.
Side note, kids, you can't change somebody in a relationship.
I think that was the thing actually that least endeared Lady Russell to me. Not the persuading, and not her general sort of mild, gentle snobbery, but the fact that there is a moment. It's fairly early on, and it's one of the earliest descriptions we have of Anne, where she's like, only in the youngest daughter could the mother be said to live again. And her whole attitude towards her is just so... It's not about Anne. It's about how much Anne reminds her of her friend. You know? There's so many moments where, fairly early on, where she's dismissive of Anne's feelings, and it very much feels like she wouldn't care as much, or she would care differently in a way that was less dismissive, maybe, if she wasn't seeing somebody else when she looked at Anne. And it was a very mild thing. I'm not even sure if it really gets carried past the first couple of chapters, but it really struck me that even she, who's the sort of the most emotionally intelligent of the people that Anne lives with, the one that most respects her and most sees her value, is still someone who can look at Anne's honestly stated emotions about things like going to Bath or the money, and just go, that's not that important, actually.
Yeah.
I don't really believe that. I'm not going to give that any weight.
Again, shouldn't be allowed within a square mile of Anne.
We love Anne. Anne is the absolute best.
Yeah, in this house we love and protect Anne Elliot.
I'd want to punch Mr. Elliot, but like, honestly, one of the things I really enjoyed about this book, and this is going back into the lack of drama thing, was that there is absolutely no danger of Anne marrying him at any point. There is no moment at which you actually genuinely feel Anne to be in danger of falling in love with him and getting into trouble.
Yeah.
He's just...
There's a bit where she sort of goes, oh, it would be nice to be Lady Elliot though, wouldn't it? Like my mum was.
Yeah. But that's it.
Yeah, and it's nothing to do with the guy.
Yeah.
It's just about, it would be nice to have my family's home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's almost not worth fighting because he's not got a hope.
He's just so bad. He's gone through, the 9 stages of hell, 10 stages of hell. He's found his new stage of hell.
Although I would have been less understanding than Anne about that pickup line at the concert where he's like, oh, the name Anne Elliot, I heard it before, associated with all these virtues, blah, blah, blah. It's such a good name. I hope you may have occasion never to change it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I was just like, deck him.
Oh,
deck
it was just so self-centered. It was like, no, just leave her alone. She's the best. We love her.
I might also punch Charles Musgrove just for being a useless piece of shit. Like, everything that Mary does in the novel is very like, I need attention. I don't know what kind of attention, but I'm not getting it, Like, we hear repeatedly that, like, as long as she's with other people who are being nice to her, she doesn't have any of these, like, complaints, and, she doesn't feel ill anymore. And, like, I just feel really sorry for her, and on her behalf, I will punch Charles Musgrove.
Is she the most cat-like character? Like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. Something's terribly wrong. I've never, ever been fed once in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, possibly, yeah.
Guys, what do you think the cat would give this book as a rating?
Not much, I'll be honest with you.
Not much. There's not much crime, and there's not much mischief, and there's not any cats.
No, a dog is mentioned at one point, but that's about as close as we get.
Although we are joined today by M's family dog,
yes.
So maybe we could do the
dog
dog's review
yes,
as well.
Let's get Wookiee's
I think the cat would give this maybe like a 2 out of 10, and not because I think it's not a good book and it's not enjoyable, but because we need to maintain the integrity of the cat rating system and save the high numbers for books that really deserve it.
Ribbons, mischief. That is what she would give a high rating for.
Yeah, and this book is light on all 3 of those.
Yeah, it's true.
What about the dog's review, Em? What do you think?
I think given that this book is an ode to the concept of mutual pining, I think it gets quite a high dog rating because Wookiee is the past master of the puppy eyes.
Aww.
I will
She
stare
really
at
is.
you longingly, but I'm incapable of telling you what it is that I actually need in order to make the puppy eyes go away. Which I think is a big mood for this book, if we're being real here.
That's fair enough.
And it's quite high, it's probably a 7. There's lots of long countryside walks. She appreciates that. There's a lot of seaside. She appreciates that.
That's understandable.
So the cat, 2 out of 10, but a more dog-friendly, what do you think? 7 out of 10 for the...
7 out of 10.
We're going to have to acquire more animals so we can have more of a diversity of animal ratings on this
What
podcast.
does a gerbil think about Sense and Sensibility? Questions we must ask
If you've got a pet,
ourselves.
The moth that lives in the corner of my room.
and you think that they would give us a high rating, send us an email, teachmycatread@gmail.com.
And send us photos. Send us photos of your sweet animal friends.
We will put them on the Instagram. Seriously, we are all for cute animal photos. It genuinely makes our day.
All right.
What else are we reading at the moment? Are we reading anything else? Or are we just having a break from the reading?
I'm rereading some Lord of the Rings fan fiction because it's the only thing that makes me feel emotion anymore. No, I've been rewatching the Lord of the Rings films and reading some fan fiction because it's my happy place and I love it very much. And I don't have much to say about it other than I love Tolkien.
I mean, you basically stole my line of "it's the only thing I can read to experience feelings anymore" because I have been I have been rereading Crush by Richard Seiken, and I basically did walk into it I need to feel some feelings. It's time to feel some feelings, and boy,
it's like that bit in Always Sunny where one of them goes, "You remember feelings? You remember having feelings, right?" That's basically 2020,
I have feelings
right?
every single day of my life. You what? But yeah, I can heartily recommend Crush by Richard Seiken. If for those of you that don't know, that is the guy whose poems end up strewn around on Tumblr, usually over gift sets of the horrible clown movie. Famous sayer of things. I'm gonna not be able to remember any of the things that he famously says now.
You're in a car with a beautiful boy.
Yes.
That one. That one.
Yes, that guy. I couldn't persuade the boy to love me, but I wore his sweater for the longest time. That guy.
Yeah. What about you, Lottie?
I am going to... I've just picked off of the bookshelf a book that I read in school. Not for school, just I remember writing a book review on it, and it's called Snowflower and the Secret Fan. And it's about this friendship between 2 girls who end up leading very different lives due to it's set in the era in China of foot binding.
Right.
Ah, yeah.
It's about the famed secrets women's writing, and they write it on this fan and talk to each other about their lives, and they're changing like circumstance due to the fact that one has more smaller feet than the other on a very base level. It's much more than that. I remember really enjoying the book at school. So yeah, I'm going to give that a reread. So yeah.
All right, next time we will be reviewing The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, which I have not read before. Although Lottie
I'm
is
about a chapter in and I'm loving it already.
I am
Lottie
so
is a Brandon Sanderson fan.
I am so excited, guys.
Right, so next time will be a Lottie special. We're all very much looking forward to that. We'll see you then. Check out our socials.
Yeah, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Tumblr. You can find all the links for these, by the way, on our website. Just type Teaching My Cat to Read .wordpress.com. Ping us an email, teachingmycattoread@gmail.com. But yes, thank you so much all for listening. Send us a message, recommend some books for us to read. Big virtual hugs, and we'll see you next time. Bye!